I'm so pleased to be here, not just with Anne Ruston today, but with Melissa McIntosh and Senator Maria Kovacic, and also, very importantly, Katie Mullens, our candidate for Parramatta. Katie's been the one who's been advocating for additional funding to come into this headspace here in Parramatta, and we've listened to that, and we've listened to the needs within the local community. It's really tough when you're a young family, or if you're a young individual who is putting off going to see a GP or coming to a headspace or another health service because you just haven't got the out-of-pocket money, or you just can't afford to fill the script that is written for you, to go to a referral. It's a really bad situation out there for many Australians at the moment. And we know over the course of the last 3 years that we've had about 272 general practices which have closed. Why? Because the cost of running those practices has just gone through the roof. The electricity, the insurance, the rents have all gone up dramatically under this government, and it's made it harder for people and families to get in to see their doctor. So I want to make sure that we lead a government and that we lead a country which can give easy access to general practice and to health services across the board in other parts of the health system as well. But we can only do that through investment and through wise spend of the money that we're putting in. Headspace was something I was very passionate about as Health Minister, and worked very closely with Pat McGorry and others, and indeed Jason, over many years as well. And it's a proven model. I want to make sure that we can get access for more patients, and as Anne points out, this will give access for about 1,800 young Australians additional into the Headspace Centre here in Western Sydney, and that's why we're here to make this announcement today. I'm very happy to take any questions, and I might start there.
So both parties have policies to overhaul the electricity system to reach net zero. How much will the Coalition's policy cost?
Well, I think this is a really interesting debate, because we've seen a couple of comical episodes from the Treasurer so far. One is that despite promising 97 times before the election that electricity prices would be reduced by $275, the Treasurer now refuses to mention that figure. He dragged, kicking and screaming, in any interview. Jim Chalmers won't mention $275, and he won't apologise to Australians for having broken that promise, and neither will the Prime Minister. And Australians are paying now $1,300 more for their electricity bills under Labor, and the Prime Minister's saying, OK, we'll give you $150, but the fundamentals are broken. And at some stage, this Ponzi scheme that the government's running, where they're pulling money out of your pocket through taxes and then giving you $150 back and expecting you to say thank you. And the Treasurer today says that families have had a 25% reduction and small businesses have had a 25% reduction in their power prices. I don't know what planet the Treasurer is living on, but I don't know a single Australian who has had a 25% reduction in their energy costs. And I think the Treasurer should come out and correct the record today, because if he can identify someone in the country who is paying 25% less in their electricity bill today than they were 3 years ago, then fair enough. But I don't believe there is a single Australian paying 25% less for their electricity today than what they were under Mr Albanese. Now, in relation to the other part of your question, what do we do? Well, we need to bring more gas into the system because we need to support electricity production, and we do that through gas. If the government continues to choke the supply of gas, the price goes up. And that's exactly what they've done through an effective tax across electricity in our system. So we need gas in the short term, and the Labor government here in New South Wales and in Victoria has said that they're going to extend the life of coal-fired power stations as well. So that's Labor promising to do that. And in the medium term, I want to do for our country what every other developed country is doing at the moment. The G20, the top 20 economies in the world, Australia is the only one that hasn't signed up to or already adopted nuclear power, because we're paying 3 times the cost of electricity in our country compared to some of those markets. And we have now blackouts and brownouts as a feature in Labor's renewables only policy. And I want to make sure that we can meet our emissions target reductions. Now, the cost of that is $331 billion, which is $263 billion less than what Labor's proposing in their energy system. And it is 44% cheaper under our model, which is renewables firmed up by nuclear, as opposed to the dream of green hydrogen, which the Prime Minister is talking about. It's not realistic, and it's going to drive up the cost of electricity even further.
So just to clarify, you stand by that 331? billion figure that was outlined.
Well, that's not our figure. That's the independent analysis. So if you look at the work that's been done by a modeller who's been used by the Labor Party to look at energy markets, that independent person costed our policy and costed Labor's policy. And that outcome meant that Labor's policy will cost taxpayers $263 billion more, and that our policy will cost 44% less. And it will mean electricity prices lower under a coalition government. It will mean we don't have the blackouts and brownouts. There have been 29,000 small businesses who have closed in our country over the last 2.5 years. Now, behind every one of those stories is somebody who's lost their life savings, somebody who has lost their house. Marriage and relationship breakups result when people lose their businesses. Bankruptcies, obviously. That's what this government has done over the last 2.5 years, and in part, it's because the cost of electricity has gone up dramatically. We were in New South Wales only a couple of weeks ago talking to a local small business, not as big as a sort of a Coles or a Woolies by any stretch, but they provided groceries and meat and fruit and veg. Their electricity bill in that business alone has gone up by $40,000 a month. So $480,000, and that's why Australians are paying 30% more for their groceries because of Mr Albanese's renewables only policy, and that's a real problem.
You're delivering this week's budget in reply. Can voters expect any more details about key coalition policies like migration and cuts to the public service?
Well, we will provide a big announcement this week in the budget reply speech, and we'll outline the next stage of what we believe is required to get our country back on track, to make sure that families can afford to live again, to make sure that with the 12 interest rate increases under Mr Albanese and the broken promise to reduce power prices by $275, where in actual fact prices have gone up by $1,300 and certainly not down by 25%, we'll provide stability, we'll help keep Australians safe at home and help keep our country safe as well in a very uncertain world. We'll have lower inflation so interest rates can come down more quickly under a coalition government, and we'll clean up Labor's mess. And we'll also restore the dream of home ownership for young Australians, which at the moment has been lost. And we'll outline more of that detail as we go toward the election, and it will be a better plan to get our country back on track, and it'll be a positive plan to make sure that we can help families and help businesses and help our economy grow.
Who is, as you know, concerned that Donald Trump's freezing of support to Ukraine is causing logistical difficulties for getting Australian tanks into the country?
Well, look, the problem with the Abrams tank precedes Mr Trump being elected. Let's make this point very clear. When we were in government, as Defence Minister, I stood with the Ukrainian ambassador at Amberley Air Base to see off the first shipment of the Bushmasters, which have literally saved the lives of some Ukraine soldiers and people. I want to see peace in that region and indeed across the world, but to stare down a dictator like Vladimir Putin, the Ukrainians need support, and they need it in the form of defence material, including these Abrams tanks. The government should have got them to Ukraine by now. This is the 3-year mark we're talking about. The government's had 3 years to do this, and now they want to blame the Middle East for inflation, and they want to blame President Trump for this and that. Every Prime Minister who is strong and worth their weight can deal with the issues before them, except for this Prime Minister. And weakness and the inability to make decisions has racked the Albanese government, and it's meant that our country's lost 3 years. And in fact, many people have gone backwards because of Mr Albanese's problems. And in relation to defence, they've stripped money out, $80 billion, and they should have dealt with this issue well before January 20.
The government has made further funding announcement for roads and transport in Western Sydney just a short time ago. Will you have further announcements for Western Sydney?
We will, and look, we will always invest more into Western Sydney because of the advocacy of Melissa McIntosh and Katie Mullens and many others. We are absolutely committed to making sure that we can help families and to deal with the infrastructure needs. I just say this to people who live in Western Sydney and indeed right across the country. The government's brought in 1 million people over the last 2 years, which is a record intake through the migration program for our country. And what it's meant is that Australians have been forced out of houses. It's meant that people are lining up for longer and paying more for rental properties. It means that Australians have just given up on the dream of home ownership. And if you flood the supply then you can bring down prices. But the government hasn't done that. They've stopped building, and so the building of houses has slowed down. At the same time, they've dramatically increased the number of people who are demanding those houses through the migration program. So we need to get a balance right, because if not, young Australians in Western Sydney and across New South Wales and the country will never achieve the dream of home ownership, and I want to make sure that we can bring that back.
And there are a number of marginal seats in Sydney's west and southwest. How confident are you of claiming those?
First point is, I think there is a real mood for change across the country at the moment, because people realise that a re-elected Labor government can only be in a minority form. So Labor can't win in their own right, everyone accepts that. They can only rely on the Teals, the Green Teals, and the Greens. The Greens have a radical agenda. They're not about the environment, and they would be dictating to Anthony Albanese, and it would be a problem for our country, a big problem. So if you've got a big spending Labor-Greens government, then inflation is going to go up again. And when inflation goes up, interest rates will go back up. Electricity costs will go up. Food's already up by 30%. I just don't think Australians can afford 3 more years of Mr Albanese. And I believe Australians will support the coalition because of our positive plan and because of our desire to keep our country safe, to help people with cost of living pressures, to deal with a very uncertain world and help people achieve home ownership again. And unfortunately, all of that is something the Prime Minister can't promise.
Just a final one, Mr. President.
Yeah.
The light rail and Riverside Theatre projects are crying out for federal funding. Is Labor ignoring Western Sydney? Would you help out?
Well, Labor has ignored Western Sydney because we're 1 minute to midnight in this term of government. We're 1 term to midnight this term of government, and the government's now rushing out policy announcements. If the government was serious, they would have announced those policies over the course of the last 3 years. And when you look at what Katie Mullens has done in her seat, she's identified projects, including headspace here at Parramatta, that required more support, and Labor had not provided that support. So I think when we've got fantastic candidates and members and senators, we have our finger on the pulse, and there are other projects that we'll provide support to. But it's like your own household budget. If you're wasting money, then you can't afford to pay for the essentials. And the Labor Party has wasted money. They've spent like drunken sailors, and in fact they have spent more and at a higher rate than any government since the Whitlam government. And that spells disaster for our economy. And when you don't manage the economy well and you don't manage money well, you can't afford to invest in these services. And that's why a coalition government will always manage our economy more effectively. And as a result, we'll be in a better position to help health services and help families and help small businesses recover from what's been a very bad period of government over the last 3 years. Thank you very much.